The evening was alive with soft laughter and clinking glasses. The hall glowed under golden lights, and the rich smell of flowers and perfume mixed in the air. Guests moved gracefully between tables, chatting and smiling, their elegant clothes brushing against each other as they made small talk. It was a gala, one of those events where people wore their finest, spoke in gentle tones, and measured every word. The tables were perfectly set, with sparkling glassware and polished silver. Everything seemed flawless, just like it had been planned for months. Among the moving crowd, there was a young waitress. She wore a simple black uniform, neatly pressed, and a name tag pinned carefully to her chest. She moved from table to table, balancing trays filled with drinks, keeping her back straight and her expression polite. She smiled when necessary, nodded when spoken to, and stepped carefully, avoiding any chance of spilling or breaking anything. Most of the guests did not notice her. To them, she was invisible. It's just part of the background that made their evening comfortable, even though her job was simple. She felt a quiet nervousness that followed her everywhere that night. Her hands shook slightly as she poured the wine. She caught herself thinking, I should be calm. I've done this 100 times. But the thought didn't help. Her eyes kept drifting to the stage at the front of the hall. A grand piano sat there, covered with a soft cloth. Its black surface shone under the lights, untouched yet demanding attention. She paused every time she passed, almost unconsciously, and let her fingers brush along the edge of the stage as if it belonged to her somehow. Only she knew the memory it brought back. Her mind drifted to another time, a simpler life, where music had been her world. Back then, mornings were filled with scales and simple melodies, afternoons with lessons and laughter. Music had been more than notes and rhythm. It had been a friend, a secret companion when life felt too heavy. But that life had changed. Bills had piled up, family responsibilities had grown, and the piano had become a dream too expensive and too fragile to hold on to. She had left it behind, tucked into the corner of her mind, a piece of her that could not be lost, but also could not be seen. A soft murmur of voices brought her back to the present. Guests were settling into their seats, and waiters moved quickly to ensure no one waited too long for a drink. She adjusted her tray, trying to calm the fluttering in her chest. There was a nervous excitement about the evening she couldn't explain. Something about the air felt different tonight, heavier than usual. Like the room was waiting for something it didn't yet know. The event staff moved hurriedly, checking notes and whispering in corners. The gala organizers were clearly stressed, speaking in clipped tones. She caught snippets of conversation as she walked past. "Where's the pianist?" One asked. "He should have been here an hour ago," another replied, their voices tight with worry. She froze in the hallway, holding her tray close. The sound made her heart skip. She knew what that meant. A moment passed in silence, and she felt a strange pull in her chest, a mix of fear and longing she could not name. She set the tray down briefly on a side table, her hands trembling slightly. Her eyes returned to the piano. The hall was full of people who had no idea what was about to happen, and yet somehow it seemed like everything depended on the music that had not yet started. Her mind went back to when she had first touched a piano years ago. The smooth keys, the soft resistance of the pedals, the thrill of making sound that could fill a room. She had been a child then, timid and small, but when she played, she felt immense. It was like she was alive in a way she never felt otherwise. A voice behind her startled her. "Tray over there, please." She nodded quickly, moving the tray without dropping a single glass. The voice was kind but hurried. She smiled politely and moved on. She was expected to serve, not to linger in thoughts of music. And yet every step she took seemed to pull her back toward the piano. Time passed slowly. The room buzzed with conversation, clinking of glasses, and quiet laughter. Waiters and waitresses moved like ghosts among the crowd, unnoticed, unappreciated. She carried drinks, cleared empty plates, and responded to polite requests with quiet efficiency. But inside, her mind wandered endlessly to the stage, to the music that had been waiting for her all these years. She wondered if it was even possible to play again. Could she sit at that piano and make the same magic she remembered? Or was it a dream that belonged only to the past? The guests began to settle in more formally. The lights dimmed slightly, and a hush fell over the hall. Organizers whispered, checking schedules, and the soft rustle of papers filled the room for a moment. She felt a tension in the air, and she knew something was wrong. The pianist still had not appeared. The music that was supposed to guide the evening, to set the perfect tone, was missing. The crowd shifted, uncomfortable, some murmuring quietly. She saw the organizers exchange worried glances, and she felt a strange tightening in her chest. She could feel the opportunity, small and frightening, hovering close, like a thread dangling before her. She tried to focus on her work, to ignore the pull of the piano, but every step she took carried her closer. Her hands ached to play, her fingers itching for the keys. She took a deep breath and whispered to herself, just a note. Just one note. Her heart beat faster with the thought. She wanted to retreat, to stay in the shadows where she belonged, but something inside her stirred. A quiet courage she had almost forgotten began to rise. The organizers moved quickly, whispering urgently. The crowd grew restless, sensing that the night might not go as planned. The tension in the room built with each passing second. She knew she could not ignore the piano any longer. The moment hung over her, heavy and impossible to avoid. She took another deep breath, feeling the smooth cloth of the piano under her fingertips. Memories flooded back the music, the joy, the way the notes had once carried her through days that felt too long, too hard. She stepped back, her hands trembling slightly, and tried to calm herself. She could not imagine doing what she wanted in front of all these people, in such a grand hall, surrounded by wealth and expectation. She was just a waitress, after all. No one would believe she could do it, and yet the music seemed to call to her in a voice she could not ignore. It was as if the room itself was waiting for her. For something she could give that no one else could, she moved quietly to the edge of the stage, her heart racing. The gala continued around her, oblivious, but she felt an invisible spotlight shining down. Every step toward the piano felt heavy, yet light at the same time, as if the ground itself was supporting her. She paused for a moment, placing her hands lightly on the keys. The surface was cool, familiar, and inviting. Her fingers twitched, longing to play. She closed her eyes and let a single note escape. It hung in the air, small but powerful, like a promise. The hush in her heart mirrored the silence that fell over the hall. For the first time in years, she felt alive. She was more than a waitress. She was a musician, a storyteller, a voice waiting to be heard. The gala continued, but in that moment, nothing else mattered. The piano, the music, and her own courage filled the space completely. She knew that whatever happened next, the night would never be the same. For her, or for anyone who was about to hear the sound that had been hidden for so long. And with that single note, story that had waited in silence was ready to begin. The young waitress stepped back from the piano, her fingers still tingling from the single note she had pressed. The sound lingered in the hall, faint but undeniable, and it seemed to still every movement around her. Guests shifted slightly in their seats, curious at the subtle change in the room's energy, though most could not quite place it. She felt her heartbeat in her ears, the fear of being exposed and the thrill of returning to something she had almost forgotten pulling at her at the same time. She took a deep breath and tried to steady herself. This could not be more real. She was not a performer. She was not someone who was expected to stand on stage in front of hundreds of people. She was a waitress, moving silently, carrying trays, filling glasses, and cleaning spills. Yet here she was, drawn to the piano, as if by some invisible force. The thought of leaving it alone now made her feel empty, almost guilty, as though she were hiding something the world needed to see. Her mind wandered back to her childhood. She had grown up in a small apartment, where the walls were thin and the streets noisy. Music had been her refuge. The piano in the corner of the living room had been her closest friend. Every day after school, she would sit on the wooden bench, her small fingers running over the keys, learning notes by ear, memorizing the music her heart remembered. Her parents had worked hard, often late into the night, so the piano had been her world. Every song she learned carried a story, a feeling, a piece of herself she could pour into it. The years had changed everything. Life demanded practicality, and the piano became a luxury she could not afford. Lessons ended, the instrument gathered dust, and she drifted into jobs that could pay the bills. Serving tables, cleaning floors, carrying trays, these were the things that kept her family afloat. Yet, every note she had ever played lived inside her, ready to resurface when called upon. And tonight something inside her was calling. As she moved back into the hall, she observed the tension in the organizers' movements. Papers shuffled, whispers flew, and a few guests looked around impatiently. The scheduled pianist had still not arrived. A man in a suit whispered sharply to an assistant, who nodded nervously and moved quickly. The young waitress saw the fear on their faces, the desperate need for a solution, and suddenly a thought appeared in her mind. Perhaps she could help. Perhaps she could play. The idea was terrifying, but it also felt like destiny. She hesitated. What would people think? Would she embarrass herself? Would someone laugh at the audacity of a waitress claiming she could play in front of this crowd? The questions swirled in her mind, but a stronger voice whispered beneath them, steady and persistent, "You can do this." Her fingers twitched again, longing for the keys, aching to touch them and make them sing. The memory of the music coursing through her veins gave her courage. She had waited years for this moment. Even if she had not known it, the staff were still panicked, moving toward the stage to see if a last-minute substitute could be found. The young waitress swallowed her fear, her hands shaking slightly, and approached them. "Excuse me," she said softly, her voice almost drowned by the background noise. The assistants looked at her, startled, their brows furrowed. "I can play," she said. "I used to play the piano professionally. I can help tonight." For a moment the words hung in the air. The assistants glanced at each other, disbelief written clearly on their faces. She knew she looked like any other server. Simple black uniform and all. She was supposed to be invisible, and yet she felt a quiet strength rising in her chest. She repeated her offer, more firmly this time. "Please, let me try. I can play." One of the organizers, a tall woman with sharp eyes, finally turned toward her. "Do you?" she asked, skepticism in every syllable. "Do you really know how to play at this level?" The young waitress nodded. "I've played for years. I need the piano. That's all. Please." Her voice was steady now, and the calm determination surprised even her. After a long pause, the organizer sighed and nodded. "Very well," she said. "But remember, this is important. Do not embarrass us." The young waitress swallowed the lump in her throat. She understood the weight of their expectations. Nodding, she made her way toward the stage, her heart pounding in her chest like a drum. The guests continued their conversations, unaware of the storm about to unfold. Stepping onto the stage, she felt the grandeur of the hall press down on her. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above, and rows of guests watched from a distance, their faces curious, their eyes questioning. The piano gleamed in front of her, the black lacquer reflecting the golden lights. She ran her hands gently across the keys, letting the familiar texture reassure her. Her fingers felt alive again, remembering the weight of each note, the subtle resistance. The way the music seemed to rise under her touch. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, letting memories guide her. She imagined the old apartment, the tiny bench, the music filling the rooms where laughter had once echoed. She felt the hours she had spent practicing, the frustration and joy that had shaped her. Every lesson, every mistake, every success had led to this moment. She exhaled slowly and opened her eyes. It was time. The first notes were soft, almost hesitant. The audience shifted, sensing something unusual. A melody floated gently through the hall, delicate and precise. It was not perfect, not mechanical, but it was alive, full of feeling. Her heart guided her hands, her mind clear of everything but the music. As the melody grew, confidence replaced hesitation. She played with emotion, letting every feeling she had ever stored in her chest pour into the keys. The room seemed to lean in closer. The guests drawn toward the sound without understanding why. The young waitress had never felt such a mix of fear and joy. Her hands moved faster, more assured, as if the piano itself knew her touch. She played songs that told stories of longing, of hope, of quiet triumphs. Each note resonated through the hall, capturing attention and curiosity. Some guests whispered to each other, confused at the talent emerging from someone they assumed would never perform. Others sat in stunned silence, their eyes wide as they realized that this was no ordinary performance. She continued, her mind and heart fully invested. For a moment, she forgot her uniform, her job, the world outside the gala. There was only her, the piano, and the music flowing between them. Her body moved instinctively, every note a word, every chord a sentence in a story that only she could tell. She played not for applause or recognition, but because she had always needed to play. This was her language, her voice, and for the first time in years. It was heard as she reached the climax of her piece. The room felt completely transformed. The chatter had stopped, the clinking of glasses was gone, and even the staff paused to listen. The music had filled the space, wrapping around the guests and holding them in a moment they would not forget. She saw expressions of awe, disbelief, and even tears on some faces. The realization that someone so unassuming could produce such beauty made the evening suddenly richer, deeper, more human. When she finally played the last note, the hall seemed to hold its breath for a moment. Silence lingered, thick and profound, before slowly giving way to applause. It started quietly, one or two people clapping, then growing louder and louder until the entire room was filled with it. The young waitress felt her hands shake and her chest swell. She had done it. She had stepped beyond fear, beyond expectation, and had brought the music back to life. The organizers approached her quickly, their expressions shifting from doubt to admiration. "That was extraordinary," one said, unable to hide surprise. "You've changed the evening." Another offered a shaky hand, saying, "Thank you. Truly thank you." She nodded, a shy smile on her face. "I'm just glad I could help," she said softly. But inside, a fire had been lit. Something she had thought lost was alive again. The music had returned, and so had a part of herself she had kept hidden for too long. As she stepped back from the piano, the applause continued, filling her with a mix of joy and disbelief. She had crossed a line she never thought she could, and yet it felt like coming home. The young waitress felt a strange calm as she sat at the piano. The keys were smooth beneath her fingers, familiar yet slightly foreign after years of absence. She inhaled deeply, letting the air fill her lungs, then exhaled slowly. The crowd waited, though they did not yet know it. The hall was filled with expectation, even if the people could not name it. Some whispered quietly among themselves, others glanced at their watches, and a few leaned forward in curiosity. Everyone felt the subtle shift in energy. Though they could not see the courage in her eyes, she placed her hands gently on the keys, testing them, feeling the resistance, remembering how each note responded to her touch. The first chord sounded soft and hesitant, almost like a whisper. Her eyes closed, and for a moment she was no longer in the grand hall but back in the small apartment of her youth. She remembered the hours of practice, the frustration of missed notes, the joy of learning something new. The memory strengthened her, giving her the confidence to continue. The melody began slowly, carefully, each note deliberate and full of emotion. She did not play for recognition, not for applause, but for herself and for the music that had waited for her. As her fingers moved across the keys, the music grew richer, more confident, more alive. It was a story in sound, a tale of longing, hope, and courage. The notes flowed naturally, as if they had been waiting for this moment for years, and the young waitress felt a connection she had never felt with anything else. Guests turned their attention to the stage. Conversations ceased, and even the staff paused, unsure whether they should move or simply watch. The melody was captivating, not just for its technical skill, but for the emotion behind it. Every note seemed to reach into the room and touch something inside the listeners. Some sat in stunned silence, unable to speak or look away. Others leaned forward, their eyes wide, realizing that the music was more than entertainment. It was a gift, unexpected and extraordinary. Her heart pounded, but not from fear. It was a mix of exhilaration and relief. She was finally doing what she had always loved, what she had been forced to leave behind. Every chord resonated with her soul, and every phrase carried a piece of her story. She let herself feel fully, letting the memories and emotions guide her fingers. The music became a bridge between her past and present, between who she had been and who she could be. The melody began to grow, building in intensity. She played with passion, letting her emotions shape the performance. There was no thought of perfection, only the honesty of the sound she created. Her fingers moved faster, yet with control, weaving intricate patterns that filled the hall with life. The guests were mesmerized. Some held their hands to their chests, as if the music had reached inside them. Others had tears in their eyes, moved by the raw beauty of the performance. The young waitress barely noticed them. She was fully immersed in the music, lost in the moment. The story behind the notes was clear to her alone. She played pieces that spoke of struggle, of moments of doubt and fear, of dreams almost forgotten. Yet there was also hope, light breaking through darkness, the quiet strength that comes from perseverance. Every note was intentional, a reflection of the life she had lived and the emotions she had carried in silence for so long. She did not need recognition. The music was its own reward. As the performance continued, the hall seemed to transform. The chandeliers reflected the soft glow of the stage, the rich colors of the decor softened by the music. The guests became part of the experience, no longer observers but participants in the emotional journey. Even the organizers, who had been tense and worried moments before, were captivated, their skepticism replaced by admiration. The young waitress felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing she had changed the atmosphere without words, simply through the music she played. The crescendo approached. She had been building to this moment, allowing the melody to swell naturally. Her fingers moved with precision and fluidity, the music reaching a peak of beauty and intensity. The notes filled every corner of the hall, wrapping around the guests, lifting them into a shared experience of wonder and awe. The energy in the room was palpable, and she could feel it respond to her touch, amplifying the power of the performance in the audience. People whispered to one another, astonished by the skill and emotion coming from someone they had assumed was simply a waitress. The contrast was striking, and it only made the performance more compelling. Eyes widened, jaws dropped, and hearts raced as the melody surged and ebbed. Each pause, each soft note was deliberate, creating tension and release, keeping the listeners fully engaged. The young waitress had not only played the piano, she had told a story that everyone in the room could feel. Her hands never faltered. Even as fatigue threatened to creep in, she pushed through, driven by the music and by a deep sense of purpose. The story she told through the piano was complete, yet she did not rush to the end. Every phrase was given its moment, every chord allowed to resonate. She played with honesty, with vulnerability, and with strength. The audience responded instinctively, moved by the authenticity of her performance. The final notes approached. She slowed her tempo, letting each chord linger longer than expected. The hall was silent except for the sound of the piano, and it felt as if time itself had paused to listen. Her heart raced, yet she remained composed, guiding the music to its natural conclusion. When the last note faded, it left a quiet stillness in its wake, a moment suspended between awe and disbelief. Then, slowly, applause began. At first it was hesitant, a few hands clapping in admiration. But it grew quickly, swelling into a roar that filled the hall. Guests rose to their feet, cheering and clapping, their faces shining with emotion. The young waitress felt a wave of relief and joy wash over her. She had done it. She had faced her fears, embraced her talent, shared it with the world. Organizers approached her, their expressions a mix of astonishment and respect. "That was incredible," one said, voice shaking. "You've saved the evening and transformed it. Thank you." Another offered a handshake, his eyes wide with admiration. "We had no idea." "You are extraordinary." She smiled shyly, her heart still racing. "I'm glad I could help," she replied softly. But deep inside, she knew this was more than helping. This was a turning point, a moment that changed her perception of herself. She had stepped beyond the role she had always been assigned and revealed a talent and courage she had almost forgotten. The applause continued, echoing in the hall, and she allowed herself a moment to bask in it, to feel the satisfaction of being seen and appreciated for who she truly was as she stepped away from the piano. The audience remained captivated, still clapping and whispering in awe. The young waitress returned to the shadows for a moment, adjusting her uniform and taking a deep breath. She had shared something deeply personal, something that had been hidden for years, and it had touched everyone in the room. She realized that this night would be remembered not just for the event itself, but for the unexpected brilliance of a single performance, performed by someone no one had expected. It was a night that would change perceptions, challenge assumptions, and create a story that would be told long after the lights dimmed and the guests departed, as the last note of the performance faded into the air. A hushed silence remained in the hall. It was a silence that spoke louder than applause ever could. The guests, who had been chatting and adjusting their chairs moments before, were frozen, caught in the magic of what had just occurred. The young waitress sat at the piano, her hands lingering over the keys, feeling the vibration of the final chord. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, a mix of exhilaration, exhaustion, and disbelief. She could not yet process what had just happened, but she felt a quiet satisfaction that she had not felt in years. Slowly, the applause began. At first, tentative and soft, then growing louder and more confident. The sound filled the room, echoing off the walls, bouncing between chandeliers, and settling into every corner of the grand hall. Hands clapped, feet stomped lightly, and some guests even whistled in admiration. People who had been skeptical or dismissive just minutes ago were now captivated. Leaning forward in their seats, eyes wide with genuine amazement, the young waitress felt warmth rise to her cheeks, but she remained composed, savoring the moment. Letting it sink in, the organizers approached quickly, their faces betraying a mixture of relief, astonishment, and respect. One of them reached out to shake her hand, a gesture of acknowledgement that seemed to carry more weight than words ever could. "That was extraordinary," the organizer said, voice firm yet shaken with emotion. "I can't thank you enough. You've transformed the evening completely." Another added, "No one could have expected that. You've given everyone here a gift. Truly remarkable." The young waitress nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm just glad I could help." But inside, aflame had been little realization that her talent and courage had created a moment no one would forget. Guests began to approach her cautiously, unsure if they should interrupt or wait. One by one, they extended hands, offered words of praise, or simply smiled with admiration. Some whispered almost conspiratorially to each other about the astonishing performance. She noticed how the same people who had glanced past her, ignoring her as just another server, now looked at her with curiosity and awe. The contrast was striking. She had stepped out of the shadows, and in doing so, it changed the way the room saw her as she stepped away from the piano. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing gently against her. It was no longer just about the performance itself. It was about the connection she had created with the audience. Music had a power that words could not match, and tonight she had wielded it. Every note she had played had touched someone, moved someone, and left an imprint on their hearts. The realization filled her with a quiet pride, tempered with humility. She had given a piece of herself to strangers, and they had recognized it instantly. The crowd's admiration did not fade quickly. People continued to talk among themselves, recounting the unexpected brilliance of the performance. Some shook their heads in disbelief, still trying to reconcile the image of a humble waitress with the skill and depth they had just witnessed. The young waitress moved carefully through the hall, returning to her duties, her movements graceful but measured. She could feel eyes following her, not with judgment, but with respect. She had become more than a server tonight. She had become the person who had transformed a routine gala into something extraordinary. She returned to the tables she had been serving, offering drinks and clearing empty plates, but her mind was elsewhere. Each time she walked past the piano, she stole a glance, feeling a pull she could not resist. It was as if the instrument itself had acknowledged her presence, rewarding her for having the courage to play. The room had changed, and so had she. The confidence she felt now was different from anything she had known before. It was quiet, grounded, and unshakable, built not on praise or recognition, but on the simple act of embracing her talent and sharing it fully. In the midst of the applause and conversations, she noticed a few younger guests lingering near the stage, watching her with wide eyes. They seemed fascinated, almost mesmerized, by what they had just witnessed. She smiled softly at them, feeling a gentle warmth spread through her. It was a reminder that moments like these had the power to inspire, to plant seeds of courage and creativity in others. She realized that her performance had done more than entertain. It had shown people that unexpected brilliance could come from anyone, regardless of their role or position. The gala continued, but the atmosphere had shifted completely. What had been a routine evening of polite conversation and gentle clinking of glasses had transformed into something alive, charged with emotion and awe. Guests spoke in hushed tones, recounting the music, the emotion, and the unexpected talent they had just witnessed. Even those who had been skeptical or impatient now seemed engaged, eager to discuss the performance and share their impressions with others. The young waitress moved among them quietly, carrying trays with drinks and smiling softly, aware that she had become a part of the story that everyone would tell after tonight. The organizers, meanwhile, were busy making notes and adjusting schedules. Clearly impressed and grateful, they whispered among themselves, acknowledging that this unexpected turn of events had saved the evening and elevated it beyond what they had imagined. Some even approached her privately, offering opportunities and invitations, recognizing her talent and courage. She listened politely, nodding, but did not allow herself to become carried away. The joy she felt came from the music itself, from the knowledge that she had faced fear and embraced her gift. The recognition was a bonus, not the goal. As the night progressed, more and more guests sought her out, eager to express their admiration or simply to speak with the person behind the performance. She answered each interaction with grace and humility, aware of the significance of the moment, but careful not to let it overwhelm her. The applause, the praise, and the attention all seemed secondary to the deeper satisfaction of having shared her music, of having transformed the atmosphere, of having reminded herself and others of the power of courage and authenticity. Throughout the evening, she continued to move through the hall, her presence now noted and respected. The staff who had once overlooked her now offered nods and smiles of recognition. Fellow servers glanced at her differently, as if seeing a new strength and confidence in someone they had always considered just another colleague. She felt a quiet gratitude for the music, for the opportunity, and for the way the evening had unfolded. It was a reminder that talent, courage, authenticity could create change in ways that were unexpected and profound, in quiet moments. When she could step aside and breathe, she reflected on how far she had come. From the small apartment where music had been her refuge to the grand gala where her performance had captivated hundreds. The journey had been long and challenging. Yet every step, every sacrifice, every moment of doubt had prepared her for this night. The piano had become a symbol not just of her skill, but of resilience, courage, and the power of embracing one's true self as the gala neared its conclusion. The young waitress returned to the piano one last time, simply to touch the keys and feel the music beneath her fingers. She played a few soft notes, gentle and soothing, as if to say goodbye to the hall, to the guests, and to the moment. The room responded with quiet attention, recognizing the intimacy of the gesture. It was a final connection, a reminder that music, when played from the heart, had the power to transcend expectations, to reach into hearts, and to create memories that would last far beyond the night itself. When she finally stepped away, the guests continued to talk and share their impressions. The young waitress returned to her duties, carrying trays and smiling quietly, fully aware that her life had shifted. She had become more than a waitress tonight. She had become a symbol of courage, of unexpected talent, and of the beauty that comes from embracing one's true self. The gala would be remembered not for its grandeur or its wealth, but for the extraordinary performance of someone who had dared to play, and in doing so, had transformed an entire evening into a story of inspiration and wonder. the gala slowly began to wind down. But the energy from her performance lingered in the hall like a soft echo. Guests moved toward the exits reluctantly, still talking in hushed tones about the unexpected brilliance they had witnessed. The young waitress moved carefully among the tables, clearing empty glasses and carrying trays with the same quiet grace she always had, yet everything felt different. She felt a sense of belonging and accomplishment that had been absent from her life for years. Tonight had shifted something deep inside her, and she could feel it radiating outward in subtle but undeniable ways. She paused for a moment near the stage, gazing at the piano that had been both her challenge and her salvation. Her fingers itched to play just one more note, to feel the smooth keys under her hands, to hear the music rise and fill the room. But instead, she allowed herself a soft smile and let the moment settle. It was a memory she would carry with her, a proof that courage and talent, no matter how hidden, could create moments of beauty that others would remember forever. Guests began approaching her, one by one, to express their gratitude and admiration. Some offered kind words, some asked questions about her background, and a few even tried to arrange future opportunities, recognizing her skill and courage. She listened politely, smiling and nodding, yet a quiet humility remained. She had not performed for fame or recognition. She had played because it was a part of her that had been waiting to breathe again. And yet, seeing the joy and amazement in the eyes of others, she could not deny that her music had made an impact, both on the audience and on herself. The organizers, who had been so tense earlier in the evening, approached her with expressions of awe and relief. "You've truly saved the night," one said. "No one expected that." "You've transformed the gala into something extraordinary," another added. "It was beautiful, powerful, and moving. You've reminded everyone here why music matters." The young waitress simply nodded, feeling the weight of their words but also feeling that the real reward was the music itself. She had reclaimed a piece of her identity, and that was something no amount of praise could measure. As she continued her duties, she noticed a few younger guests lingering near the stage, clearly inspired by what they had just seen. They whispered to each other, pointing occasionally at her, and she smiled softly. It was a reminder that courage and talent, even when hidden, could ignite inspiration in others. One small gesture, one choice to act despite fear, could ripple outward and touch lives in ways she could not yet fully understand. She felt a quiet sense of fulfillment, knowing that her music had done more than entertain. It had inspired. The gala staff began packing up, and the hall gradually emptied. Chairs were stacked, glasses were collected, and decorations were carefully removed. Yet the young waitress felt as though the room itself carried a lingering energy from her performance. It was as if the memory of the music, the courage it took to play, and the emotions it stirred had left an invisible mark on the space. She lingered near the stage, running her fingers lightly over the keys one last time, savoring the connection she had forged with the instrument and the hall. Outside the gala hall, city lights glimmered in the distance. The young waitress stepped out for a brief moment, taking a deep breath of the cool night air. The world felt larger and more welcoming than it had just hours ago. She reflected on the journey that had brought her here, the long hours of practice, sacrifices she had made, the fear of failure, and the determination to hold on to a dream that had seemed impossible. Each step had led her to this moment. In each note she had played was a testament to her resilience and courage. She thought about the people who had seen her differently tonight, the guests who had witnessed something extraordinary coming from someone they had underestimated. The applause, the admiration, the quiet respect she had received were symbols of a larger truth. Talent and courage could not be hidden forever. When one embraced their true self and acted from the heart, the world could not ignore it. This realization filled her with quiet joy, a sense of purpose she had longed for but had rarely felt so fully as she returned to her duties. Carrying the last tray of empty glasses, she felt a shift within herself. She no longer saw herself only as a waitress. She was a musician, a storyteller, someone capable of creating beauty and inspiring others. The role she had been assigned by society did not define her. Tonight, she had stepped beyond expectation. And in doing so, she had changed the way people saw her hand, perhaps the way she saw herself, Later, as the gala finally came to an end and the last guests departed, the organizers gathered around to offer final thanks. They spoke in terms of admiration, opportunity, and recognition, acknowledging that her performance had been the highlight of the evening. She listened politely, responding with quiet words of gratitude, but internally, she knew the true victory was deeper. It was the courage to act, the reclaiming of a talent she had feared lost, and the knowledge that she had touched hearts through music, walking through the now-empty hall. She paused one last time at the piano. The reflection of the chandeliers shimmered on its polished surface, and she felt a sense of reverence. This instrument, once a silent witness to her dreams and struggles, had now been the medium through which she expressed herself fully. She traced her fingers lightly over the keys, as if to say thank you, to acknowledge the connection, and to commit the memory to her heart. As she left the gala and stepped into the quiet night, the city lights reflecting in the puddles of rain from earlier, she felt a sense of peace and accomplishment. The world seemed full of possibility, each street and building illuminated by the memory of the evening's music. She had faced fear, embraced her talent, and shared it with strangers who had responded with awe and appreciation. It was a profound reminder that moments of courage could create lasting impact, not just for oneself, but for others. In the days that followed, the memory of the gala remained vivid in her mind. Guests spoke of her performance, the organizers shared stories of her courage, and even fellow staff members expressed admiration and respect. Yet she carried the memory with quiet humility, understanding that the true significance lay not in recognition, but in the act of embracing her talent and daring to share it. She had reminded herself of her own worth, and in doing so, had created a moment of shared, human connection that would endure long after the gala lights dimmed. The young waitress continued her work, but with a new sense of purpose and confidence. She no longer viewed herself solely through the lens of her job. She was a musician, a dreamer, a storyteller who had reclaimed a piece of herself that had been hidden for too long. And though life would continue with its challenges and responsibilities, she now knew that courage, talent, and authenticity could create moments of magic. Moments that could transform not just a gala, but the lives of those who witnessed them. She had stepped into the light, and the world had responded in kind.